Traveling across the plains as a pioneer was no easy task, and Thomas E. Ricks was the perfect example of this. As he laid on the ground covered in his own blood, likely thinking that this was the end and he was going to die, he heard a voice proclaim,
"You will not die. You will live to go to the valley of the mountains, and there you will do a great work in your day and generation."
For Thomas, true words may have never been spoken. Thomas didn't die that day. He did travel to the Valley of the Mountains, and there he assisted in the great work of gathering pioneers to form new towns and societies. One of the biggest contributions he assisted in was creating and overseeing the Bannock State Academy. He was so influential to the school that 2 years after his death, it was renamed Ricks Academy in his honor, then Ricks College, before it ultimately became Brigham Young University, Idaho. Welcome to the BYU-Idaho Roots of the Mighty Oaks podcast. I'm your host, Eden Rowe, and here we talk about the history of BYU-Idaho and how it applies to us today. The stories shared during this podcast are true, and they can help us understand and appreciate how BYU-Idaho became our beloved institution. Thomas Edwin Ricks was known for his kindness and generosity since the beginning. He donated his time, energy, and money to help build the community wherever he lived. He would even give you the shirt off his back if you asked him to. At times, his kindness took a toll on him, financially and sometimes physically. It also didn't help that Thomas sustained a few severe injuries in his lifetime, but nonetheless, he did all he could to help others. At the age of 16, Thomas was thrown from his horse and broke his femur. Though it did heal, he never fully recovered and he spent the rest of his life walking with a limp. But his limp didn't stop him from serving others. He and his family joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints in February of 1845, when Thomas was 17. And that same year, he and his father Joel took part in constructing the Nauvoo Temple. Their family only lived there for a little while before, like many others, they prepared to travel to their next home in the Salt Lake Valley, which they hoped would be a Zion. However, they had a pit stop on their way, and for 2 years the Ricks family lived in Iowa in winter quarters. In 1848, when Thomas was 20 years old, his family joined the Heber C. Kimball Wagon Company and began traveling west. It turned out to be a very eventful experience. On June 6, 1848, a great commotion was happening in camp. A group of Native Americans came in and started leading away a good portion of the company's cattle. Thomas and 3 other boys jumped on their horses in order to lead the cattle back. As they rode out, they were shocked when they found themselves surrounded by Native Americans who began shooting at them. Thomas was struck almost instantly and fell off his horse. The other boys tried to fight back before eventually retreating to camp to tell Thomas's family the heartbreaking news that Thomas was dead. Thomas had 3 bullets in his body. 2 were in his kidneys and 1 was in his spine. He recalls that as he laid there, one Native American approached him with a knife, preparing to scalp him. He put his arm up to protect himself, and miraculously, the man changed his mind, stole Thomas's gun, and ran. Thomas was now left to his own thoughts, and all of them were focused on his family. He was the oldest of 12 children, and he felt partially responsible for their well-being. Thomas later wrote,
"As I lay there, weltering in blood, I thought of the condition of my father and family and how badly they needed my assistance in crossing the plains and making a home in a new land, and wondered if I was going to die."
After he thought this, he said he heard a voice tell him that he was going to live and that he would have a part to play in settling the West. He was filled with hope, knowing that the Lord would spare him and that he would live through this. Thomas was found by some of his companions who came back to retrieve his body. Getting back to camp took some time. They had to float him down the river and drive him in a carriage since he wasn't able to walk on his own. When he got into camp, the company doctor examined him. The doctor saw no hope in a recovery and told Thomas that removing the bullets was too dangerous and he would probably die within the next few hours. Thomas received a blessing from Heber C. Kimball, who told him that he would recover. Throughout the rest of his life, Thomas lived with 3 bullets lodged in his body. But more importantly, he learned that when the Lord promised something, it was true. Thomas spent his life anxiously engaged in a good cause. In the April 1855 General Conference, he was called to serve a mission in Las Vegas with 29 other men. His mission lasted 18 months, but during that time he found his life calling. In a letter to Thomas's first wife, Tabitha, he wrote,
I do expect that from this time forth my time will be spent in the work of the Lord throughout time and all eternity, and that is my desire and my determination.
He took his desires to serve God very seriously because within just 10 days of coming home from his mission, Brigham Young announced at the October 1856 General Conference that volunteers and supplies were needed right away to help rescue the Martin and Willie Handcart companies. Thomas and 40 other volunteers left the same day to provide relief and to save their fellow saints in Wyoming. When the Willie and Martin Handcart companies first headed out from Nebraska, they had a delayed start, which meant the company would face colder temperatures and weather than most companies would, and likely have more saints face illness and death. Determined to reach Zion as soon as possible, they continued their journey, very aware of the risk. Months later, they are now in serious need of food and clothing because the harsh conditions were destroying more than just their bodies. It was destroying their hope. The rescue party, which Thomas was a part of, arrived just in the nick of time. In late October, they arrived at Willow Creek on the Sweetwater River, where they found the Willie Handcart Company. Thomas and the other volunteers passed out supplies and built fires for the starving travelers. After this, he and half of the original volunteers left to seek out the Martin Handcart Company before finding them on November 4th, 1856. The volunteers crossed over the freezing Sweetwater River multiple times to bring the immigrants to safety. Thomas Ricks was identified as one of the men who participated in this treacherous activity. He risked his own life to save many. Around 69 people died in the Willie Handcart Company, and between 150 to 170 died from the Martin Handcart Company. Although these deaths were heartbreaking and devastating, many more would have been followed if the rescue party hadn't been there. In 1859, Thomas and his family moved to Cache Valley, Utah. He lived there for quite some time. However, he didn't just spend his time just lounging around at home. Thomas participated and volunteered multiple times to lead and assist fellow pioneers in crossing the plains from Nebraska. He ended up doing this 5 times in his lifetime. While living in Cache Valley, he served as the sheriff and had other occupations as well. He eventually moved to Logan, and around that time, he received a time-consuming calling from the church in December of 1882. He was asked around the age of 55 to be a bishop for the Bannock Ward. The only issue was the Bannock Ward was 185 miles away from Logan. He and his family would have to pack up their lives and move to Idaho. Thomas Ricks made a remarkable impression on the saints in the Bannock Ward. In fact, not long after moving to Idaho, the area was named after him. On March 11, 1883, the town of Rexburg was born. Rex is the German equivalent to the name Rix. Thomas was a little bit embarrassed about the whole thing, but I can only imagine that if he was around for the future name of the Bannock State Academy, that embarrassment would have skyrocketed. While serving as the bishop for the Bannock Ward, many more people moved to Rexburg and the surrounding area. A problem arose with so many new farmers moving into the community who all relied on irrigation systems. There wasn't enough water for every new farmer, especially in the drought seasons. Thomas suggested a solution known as the Great Feeder. The Great Feeder was a 116-foot lawn dam that was located 16 miles from Rexburg. It was completed in 1895. It was known at the time as the nation's largest irrigation system. This proposal helped water 100,000 acres. The area was soon big enough to become a stake, meaning that multiple wards would be formed and a stake president was needed in the local area to oversee those wards. The man for the job was obvious. Thomas was called to be the first stake president for the Bannock stake. While serving as the stake president, Thomas was asked to help establish an academy for the saints in the area. With guidance from the first commissioner of church education, Dr. Carl G. Mazer, the two worked together to oversee these efforts. The Bannock State Academy was officially up and running on November 12, 1888. Thomas served on the school board of education to keep the school afloat during financial turmoil. He also oversaw the transition from the one-story log school into a three-story building and helped raise the necessary $40,000 to build it, which would have been over $1.4 million today. He served as the chair for the Board of Education for 13 years until his death in 1901. Unfortunately, he died before he ever saw the improved building. With the move of the school to a larger building, the name of the academy changed too. It became known as the Fremont Stake Academy because a new stake was made as more saints moved to the area. However, that name didn't stick for long. The Board of Education realized that more stakes would pop up in the area, and they needed a name that could represent everyone attending the school. On February 27, 1902, the First Presidency and Quorum of the 12 Apostles came together to discuss names for the school. They decided to change its name to Rick's Academy to honor the man who organized the school. Over the years, the academy changed names several times before eventually circling back to being widely known and loved as Rick's College, the two-year private college. When the announcement came in 2000 that Rick's College would become a four-year institution known as Brigham Young, University-Idaho, it was both exciting and hard for employees, students, and community members to process such a big change. Rick's College was known to have a special spirit. Students and teachers referred to this feeling as the spirit of Rick's, and it was known and discussed everywhere on campus. One of the biggest worries about the changes to BYU-Idaho was that the spirit of Rick's would cease to be present. Many were concerned that the feeling of unity and being one, shared among students and employees, stemmed from the school's small, tight-knit community, and that with such increasing numbers of students and additional changes, the school would lose this special feeling. David A. Bednar was the president of the school during the transition. A year after being released as university president, Elder Bednar came back, this time as a member of the Quorum of the 12 Apostles, in 2005 to dedicate the Thomas E. Ricks Building and Gardens. During the dedication, he addressed the elephant in the room that some were still feeling. With so many drastic changes, did that mean the spirit of Ricks was gone? He shared, quote, "In recent years, some of the new students at BYU-Idaho, students who have not acquainted themselves with the history of Ricks College, have wondered why we talk so much about the spirit of Ricks when the school is now named Brigham Young, University-Idaho. The answer to that question is very simple. The spirit of Ricks has been and always will be a defining characteristic of this institution, regardless of the name of the institution. You will find many definitions for the spirit of Ricks, but today I would like to reiterate the definitions I came to understand during my service here in Rexburg. The spirit of Ricks is the Holy Ghost and its attendant spiritual gifts." Close quote. Thomas E. Ricks had the Holy Ghost present in his life. I believe if he didn't, he would not have had the strength to go back and save so many pioneers. He would have not graciously dedicated his life to serving God, and he would have not spent his last years working for the Board of Education to improve the lives of so many others. BYU-Idaho today still has the spirit of Ricks. The spirit of Ricks is the spirit. We can feel it as we serve, prepare, and strive to be who God needs us to be. God does not abandon those who seek after him. And if we are willing to follow his plan and do what he needs us to do for his work, the spirit of Ricks will forever live at BYU-Idaho. Thank you for listening to the Roots of the Mighty Oaks podcast. This episode has been produced and read by BYU-Idaho communications student Eden Rowe.